2012, I produced a radio show and podcast called Change Surfer Radio. The show was eclectic, but its tagline was a sexy high-tech vision of a radically democratic future, and it helped shape the techno-progressive ideas that we've been nurturing at the IET. Many are still relevant today, and it's time to dust them off and share them again. This interview with Professor Warren Wager was recorded October 3rd, 1998. Warren Wager was an historian, futurist, professor at SUNY Binghamton, expert on H.G. Wells, and a history of the very provocative A Short History of the Future, which is still a recommended read. This is Dr. J with Change Surfer Radio. For the next half hour, keep your radio tuned to the left and your mind in the open position as we present a sexy high-tech vision of our radically democratic future. I'm speaking with Dr. Warren Wager. He's a professor of history at SUNY Binghamton and a futurist. He's written most recently The Next Three Futures, Paradise of Things to Come. Is that your most recent work, your most recent book?
Well, The Short History of the Future, second edition, was 92, and The Next Three Futures was 91. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, those are the two most recent. I count The Short History second edition as being a new book because enormous amounts of changes had to be made between the 1989 edition and the 1992.
Right. I actually read the first edition, and...
we must forget all about that.
Well, I thought that in some ways it was quite prescient if you just shortened some of the time frames a little bit.
Right.
But we'll get to that in a second. And he's also an expert on the work of H.G. Wells, and I welcome you, Dr. Wager.
Glad to be here.
The first thing I want to talk to you about is your work on H.G. Wells. You've written quite a bit about his contributions to social, historical speculation. And can you just elaborate a little bit on why you think H.G. Wells is a pivotal figure?
As a matter of fact, my next book will be a return to H.G. Wells. Not exactly a book of mine, but Greenwood Praeger and Adamantine Press in Britain are publishing a new edition of what I regard as one of Wells's most seminal works, The Open Conspiracy, which dates back to 1928. It's been out of print for many years. Now we're bringing it back into print with a long introduction by me and complete index, and it's going to be coming out sometime near the end of this year or the beginning of next year.
Great.
But my interest in Wells goes back to childhood. I learned history when I was a little boy from reading The Outline of History, and I learned biology from reading Wells's The Science of Life, and I read the early science fiction novels when I was really just beginning to read, and so he imprinted on me at that time as a thinker with enormous range and stretch, and someone who could think about the past and the future and the present and tie them all together with lucid visions of what's possible in terms of what has already happened.
That's always
been my interest, the connection between the past and the future.
I don't mean to digress, but I just discovered recently that although we think of him as a science fiction writer, his History of the World was a New York Times bestseller for 2 years in a row.
Absolutely. The Outline of History sold more than 2 million copies in English and was translated into dozens of languages and has had, it's out of print now in this country, but it had a long run, many years. And in fact, I just finished teaching a seminar in which we looked at the Outline of History again from a fresh perspective, a graduate seminar, looking at it as a theoretical work as well as a work of enormous readability. It's also got a structure of world history that I think compares very favorably with the Toynbees and the Spenglers of the world. Wells was a remarkably original thinker, and
he didn't shy from,
way ahead of his time,
He didn't shy from making judgments about the civilizations that he wrote about, as I remember the work.
Yes, well, of course, some people would regard the outline of history as a tract for world government, and in a sense, that's exactly what it was.
It's the final chapter.
The final chapter, if you go back to the original editions, but he has a lot to tell us about the rhythms and the cyclical patterns in the history of civilization. I particularly like his concept of the community of will in its struggle with the community of faith and obedience. And that's the way he describes the pattern throughout ancient history of nomadic or barbarian tribes moving in on civilized peoples and shaking them up and providing a new ruling class. And it's just an amazing attempt to survey not just the history of mankind, but also he goes all the way back to the beginnings of Earth, so that you get a perspective of over millions and hundreds of millions of years. And that's the kind of mind-stretching vision that appealed to me when I was a boy, and it's never left me. I always found his prose stimulating and his ideas, imperative. And this is the guy that 100 years ago was preaching a world revolution to establish a scientifically managed and democratic and just world state. And I think that's still got to be our goal.
Wells was a socialist, but he wasn't a Marxist in the sense of having an expectation that things would necessarily happen to a pattern, but he did have some expectations about the future.
No, he wasn't a Marxist. He had a blind spot where class analysis was concerned. He didn't like to talk about classes. I think that's partly a reflection of his own origin as a lower middle class Englishman, a child of a shopkeeper and a lady's maid who never quite identified with the working people, although he certainly did a lot for them. But he did not have the kind of deep, visceral empathy for the condition of working people around the world that he would have had to be a good Marxist.
But he did expect that there would be a quasi-socialist government in the future, but he wasn't sure it was whether it was going to be a good thing or a bad thing, if you look at his fiction work, right?
Yes. I mean, in his fiction, he's really much more daring than in his nonfiction, and that's why the survival of the science fiction novels is not such a bad thing. I do sometimes regret that the nonfiction has been largely forgotten, but in the fiction, he did anticipate both evil and good futures involving world's governments of all sorts, so that he's quite aware of all the things that can go wrong. One of his first great novels of a dystopian future, you might call it, is called When the Sleeper Wakes, which he wrote in 1899, and in this novel, he anticipates a plutocratic world state that is really a nightmare, a tyranny. And a revolution breaks out near the end of the story against it. But this is not a Pollyanna view of the future, and I think it had a lot of influence on other dystopian writers like Zamyatin in Russia and Aldous Huxley.
Mm-hmm. But he also had some quite positive visions, like in Things to Come.
Oh yes, of course, sure. I mean, his usual formula was that there would be a great catastrophe, a great crack-up in the future, whether the result of a great war or something else, and out of that disaster would come the phoenix of the world state.
Which kind of leads us to your own work, The Short History of the Future, which you wrote the first edition of in 1989, and events in the world quickly outpaced your projection, but it was a history of the next 200 years.
Don't remind me.
Well, what are some of the things that have been reflected in your most recent edition?
The first edition was written in 1987 and anticipated that the Soviet Union would continue, would not break up, in fact, until 2044 in the aftermath of a catastrophic global war that started in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So I was dead wrong, of course, about the survivability of the Soviet Union, and dead wrong about the Cold War continuing on for another couple generations.
As we're 99% of all futurists.
But yes, I'm not alone in this. In fact, as far as I know, no major figure in U.S. intelligence, in the State Department, in the CIA, and in academia, nobody really did foresee this almost sudden self-destruction of the Soviet Empire. It was just not foreseen at all. We didn't realize how weak and feeble it was, and how its attempts to reform itself simply opened the door to complete collapse. So, in that, I was completely wrong. But in the second edition, I anticipate the same kind of global catastrophe occurring in 2044, but it's now the result of the defection of the United States from the ranks of the great powers, our association with third world countries such as China and Brazil, and a preemptive strike by the advanced countries of Europe and East Asia against us, in which we retaliate, and then the world does have a chance to be reborn later on after much terrible loss of life.
Now, one of the reasons why you're not actually predicting things, but you're creating a possible scenario of future conflicts, which might lay the waste and lay the ground for something positive to grow out of it.
Yes, let me say that no futurist, and I think the better ones all admit this, no futurist knows a blessed thing about the future. We don't have any facts about the future. We have no primary sources. We have no evidence. There is nothing that we can say for sure about the future. All we can do is track various trends and see how they might interact with one another, and hope that in providing a variety of scenarios of what could happen, that we will help prepare our species to cope with these various possibilities as they arise. And so there's really three scenarios in A Short History of the Future. In one of them, capitalism is triumphant and does its job, and although there are problems and difficulties, it works pretty well. And then in the second scenario, you have a socialist world state that becomes bureaucratic and top-heavy and sort of arthritic, and it's replaced with a third scenario, which is a decentralized, communitarian kind of world where everybody does pretty much what they please in small autonomous communities. So there's really three different visions of the future here, and you can take your choice.
And you sketch those into a linear pattern on the basis of world systems theory?
Yes. The afterword of the book is written by Immanuel Wallerstein, who is sort of the founder of modern world system theory and sociology. It's a combination of sociology and history, and I find it very persuasive. I think I arrived at most of the same ideas independently long ago myself, but looking at the world as a system, a global economy, an international system, global technology, global culture, this is, I think, the only way to analyze the world that we've had really for hundreds of years now, not just in the present, but for hundreds of years. And this is something that Wallerstein's been able to do. And he's a colleague of mine at Binghamton University, and he agreed to read the novel, and when he read it, he liked it, and he agreed to write the afterward. So I was very pleased, because that got the book into the hands of a good many sociologists who would otherwise never have heard of it.
Well, it certainly seems in terms of your short-term scenario that we'll be under the general domination of capitalism for the next foreseeable decades. That seems pretty right on.
I think that the capitalists have a lot of life left in them. The notion that Marx had in the 19th century that the overthrow of capitalism was imminent, it just defies his own analysis. I mean, he himself realized that capitalism was just getting into its stride in the 19th century, and just beginning to take over the world and transform the world economy. And he himself said that no system can disintegrate until it has fully developed all of its potentials, all of its premises have been carried through. And capitalism was, though you can trace it all the way back to the 15th century and perhaps even earlier, it certainly did not flower fully around the world until the 19th century. And this would then lead one to believe that it would have at least a couple centuries of productive life before its internal contradictions might shake it apart. And I think we're beginning to see some of those internal contradictions taking over at the present time. But it'll be still a number of generations. I say 2 in the book, but it might be 4, it might be 6 before those contradictions catch up with it.
Mm-hmm. Now you combine the roles of speculator and historian and social scientist with that of activist. And as an activist, you've written articles which have been very stimulating for a broad audience. In fact, the Journal of World Systems Theory has devoted a whole issue to your speculations in this regard about the need to combine democratic socialism with a campaign for world government. And can you describe your thoughts there?
It's troubled me for many years that most socialists have operated traditionally within a national framework. And, of course, socialism in its various forms has had a lot to do with galvanizing and informing movements of national liberation in the Third World, or the so-called Third World. And it's understandable why this would happen, but then the problem is that you lose sight of the global imperatives. You lose sight of the need for global controls over the environment, global controls to maintain peace and order in the world, and many other things that only a world government can do. And so what you have, of course, is when socialism triumphs in a given nation, then that may be fine for that nation for the time being, but then there are other countries that also go socialist or don't go socialist, and these various countries, with or without a socialist government, find themselves opposed to one another, competing for resources, competing for land, competing for glory and power, competing for this and that, and they lose all sight of the global perspective. And I don't think that's at all what the founders of socialism had in mind in the 19th century, whether you're talking about Fourier or whether you're talking about Marx or any of the great thinkers of the 19th century. Their concern was that we transcend national boundaries, that this is just a way station along the way with the nation state, and that the final goal has got to be a commonwealth of working people, of all kinds of working people, white collar, blue collar, you name it. Everyone who works for a living and participates in the human adventure should realize that the only way they can possibly live together in peace and harmony with themselves and with the environment and with each other is through world controls that are democratically established. So my hope is that one of these days there will be coming out of the socialist tradition a world party or something of that nature, a movement, a world political movement that will take as its goal not just national liberation, but human liberation and the establishment of a democratic socialist world state. So I'm not an activist in the sense that I go out and stand on platforms and orate or anything of that sort. My activism is confined to writing. But I do believe, and I think a number of my colleagues in the world systems movement believe, that the ultimate goal of socialism has got to be a global commonwealth.
Now, I've had on a number of thinkers who write about world systems theory and world government. The question gets raised of why do we need one organization or one party? It seems like there are a number of organizations and parties around the world that are working for democratization at the global level. Does it really need to be unified into one political organization?
Oh, yes. I really believe that because there's no question about it. One group of people, if they stick together and seek their own best interests, whether they're democratic socialists or fascists or whatever they are, if they seek their own best interests without regard to all their brothers and sisters all over the world, then there's going to be competition, there's going to be rivalry, there's going to be prejudice, there's going to be conflict, there's going to be war. Mm-hmm. And we've seen war among socialist countries in our time, or self-styled socialist countries. I'm not sure socialism has really been achieved anywhere, mm-hmm. but we just can't go on like that. That kind of fratricidal conflict between groups of people, no matter what their political system, no matter what their economic system, that kind of conflict is unacceptable in today's world, and certainly going to be in the 21st century. We've got enormous problems to solve regarding the environment, population pressure, food, energy. We need a common global policy where we all pull together for the common good instead of seeking the national good or the local good or the tribal good.
Well, I really appreciate your coming on to talk about your ideas. You've got a homepage, and that's history.adm.binghamton.edu/wagar.htm, and you have some links there to some of your work. And also, if you go to the Event Horizon homepage, you can check out links to the various books that Dr. Wagar has written, and also the special issue of the Journal of World Systems, which is devoted to a discussion of Dr. Wagar's ideas. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to Change Surfer Radio. If you want to learn more about radical democratic transhumanism, or want to share your thoughts about the show with me, Dr. J, email me at jhughes@changesurfer.com. Also, check out past and future shows and myriad relevant links at the website, www.changesurfer.com. Check back next week at the same time for Change Surfer Radio.